Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy my videos. I'm currently growing the channel and I'm getting very close to 1,000 subscribers, so it would mean the world to me if you could support me. And today's deck is going to be focused around Tom Bombadil from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set. And if you don't know what Tom Bombadil does, for 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green, it's a legendary creature God Bard 4/4 with, as long as there are 4 or more lore counters among sagas you control, Tom Bombadil has hexproof and indestructible, and whenever the final chapter or ability of a saga you control resolves, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a saga card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest onto the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. So it may surprise you to hear this, but I am going to be building around sagas in this deck. I know, I'm a bit of a maverick. However, we do have some interesting, spicy new additions. Tom Bombadil is pretty resilient thanks to his first ability, but we do need a little bit of setup. And we definitely want to delay our sagas from sacrificing until the right moment. So because of that, we have a lot of cards that allow us to move counters around our sagas, remove them, add them, do different stuff with them. In this case, we can also make sure that we're not sacrificing 2 sagas on the same turn, which means that we're missing out on a Tom Bombadil trigger. If we can sacrifice our sagas during our opponent's turn, it makes it so much more likely that we are going to be able to take advantage of all those juicy triggers and replace our sagas with new ones. So yeah, we have a lot of ways to manipulate counters in this deck. And without further ado, let's get started. We're getting started with Archon of Sun's Grace. This is a pretty sweet card because it's going to make nice little chump blockers which have lifelink. We don't have that many creatures in this deck, so it's nice to know that we can have a little bit of board presence thanks to this. Next up we have Bloom Tender, which is fantastic in any 5-color deck. It's going to allow us to ramp really nicely. Next up we have Chisei, Heart of Oceans, and this is one of the ways we can manipulate counters by removing a counter from an opponent we control during our upkeep, which should be easy since we have so many sagas. We can keep this around and also continue getting value from our sagas and even trigger the same ability multiple times. Doomwake Giant is going to be great with all the enchantments we have in the deck. It's going to keep small creatures off our opponent's board, and if we have enough triggers, it can deal with their mid-sized creatures as well. Eidolon of Blossoms is one of the best ways to draw cards in an enchantment deck, and it even draws one when it enters the battlefield itself. Feyborrow Elder is another copy of Bloom Tender. Having as many of these effects as possible is great. Again, Arcanum Weaver is going to be a great way to recycle enchantments. We can even put the final chapter of a saga on the stack and then sacrifice it against ability since it was going to sacrifice itself anyway, and that's some really nice value. Goldberry River Daughter is going to allow us to move counters around, and it can also draw some cards, which is really nice. It is a little bit slow seeing as it's going to take 2 turns to move something onto her and put it onto something else, but it's still a pretty decent card. Heliod the Radiant Dawn is great because it can recycle an enchantment card from our graveyard, which is obviously going to be great, and then when we flip it over to the other side, it's going to give all of our stuff flash, which is even better. Herald of the Pantheon gives us a nice little discount and life buff for each enchantment we play. Hex Parasite is a great way to remove counters to our enchantments, and it can even remove multiple at once. Jin-Gitaxias is going to trigger a lot in this deck because we have a lot of non-creature spells with mana value 3 or greater, and then on the flip side it happens to be a saga, so it synergizes quite well. Jukai Naturalist is another version of Herald of the Pantheon that's giving us a discount for our enchantments. Sanctum Weaver is going to add a ton of mana and is again another effect similar to Bloom Tender. Satsuki the Living Lore allows us to add extra counters to our sagas, which is really nice, and then when it eventually dies to a board wipe or something, we get to return something from our graveyard to our hand. Satyr Enchanter is going to draw some cards. Scholar of New Horizons I really like. You do have to have quite a few planes in your deck, but once you do, this is going to be great because it's going to allow us to remove counters from our enchantments and get us value as well while we do so. Sometimes it just ramps us as well, which is incredible. Sadistan Champion is going to draw us cards and grow every time we play an enchantment. Those are both fantastic abilities. Sithis Harvest Hand is another staple in enchantment decks. This is going to draw us cards and gain us life every time we play an enchantment. Weaver of Harmony allows us to copy one of our enchantment triggered abilities. That is a really solid effect to have when you're playing a bunch of sagas, and then it also just buffs our enchantment creatures. We don't have that many of those, but it's still a nice little bit of text to have. So the Enchanter can fetch us a saga every time it attacks, which is great value. Moving on to enchantments, we have Azusa's Many Journeys. This is a pretty decent one that gives us some nice basic value and can come down pretty early. Behold the Unspeakable deals with our opponent's creatures really well and actually becomes a huge threat later on in the game. Finding the Old Gods is going to mess with our opponent's stuff, and then it's also going to ramp us, and the final ability isn't that great, but we can recycle the first and the second multiple times. Birth of the Empyrean gives you a massive amount of value if you get to trigger all 3 chapters. It's like a 10 for 1 or something, so this card is really, really good. Elspeth Conquers Death is going to be great. It's going to act as removal, it's going to make stuff harder to cast for our opponents, and then it's going to be a reanimation spell, and if we get to recycle any of the first or third mode, that's really good. Elspeth's Nightmare is similarly going to act as removal, and it's going to take stuff from our opponent's hands, and we do want to hit the 3rd chapter on this because exiling a graveyard can be really good. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a fantastic card in almost every format, and I don't think I need to tell you how good it is and why it's perfect in this deck. Historian's Boon synergizes so well with the theme of our deck. It's going to give us some 1/1 tokens, which can be great at stopping our opponent's aggression since we're quite a slow deck, and then when our sagas trigger their final ability, we're going to get a 4/4 angel with flying every time. In the Darkness Binding, I really like. It's got 4 chapters, which helps give Tom Bombadil hexproof and indestructible, and it provides a steady stream of creatures and tempts us, which are both good abilities to have in this kind of deck. The creatures also have menace as well, so it's a really solid card. If we ever get to turn 4, we can have a super big turn with this and swing with a lot of creatures. Inventive Iteration provides some really nice value on the front side, and it's really annoying on the flip side when it transforms. Your opponents are going to hate this card. Jukin Defends the Temple gives us a nice little bit of ramp. It can also pump our creatures a little bit, and the backside is a pretty relevant, strong dragon. Cura Best the Sea God is one of our top end cards. It's going to give us a creature token. We do want a lot of sagas that make creatures, and then it can help us finish the game pretty easily and even steal one of our opponent's creatures. This is one of the best ones to recycle the abilities because they're all so strong that getting multiple triggers out of any of them is basically really good. Long List of the Ents is here for one reason and one reason alone, and that is to make sure that Tom Bombadil almost always has hexproof. It can give him hexproof and indestructible for multiple turns without needing to have any other sagas out, and that's pretty valuable, I think. And occasionally it is going to give us some +1/+1 counters. Our creatures all have very diverse types, but mostly we want it there to guarantee we can protect Tom Bombadil. Love Saga Night and Day allows us to play politics a little bit, and then it's going to create a flyer. We need some card draw based on sagas, and getting a creature out of it is good too. Metamized Prophecy is a really interesting one. It's really good if we can accelerate it out, because then it's much easier to meet the requirements. It's a fairly minor saga, but we do need some early game ones, and this definitely fits the bill. Michiko's Reign of Truth is another early game saga, but this one is also really good late game. It can give huge buffs to our creatures, including itself. We do have quite a few lifelink creatures as well, so this is very relevant. Phyrexian Scriptures is a board wipe on a saga. Since we have so many ways to accelerate sagas, this can come out of nowhere and really surprise our opponents. Scroll of Isildur is going to frequently have a target for the first ability, and then the other abilities that slow our opponents down and draw cards equal to the tapped creatures they have synergize very well with some of our other sagas, such as Cura Best the Sea God. Showdown of the Skulls is excellent card advantage in a deck like this, and it can also grow our creatures. Sigil of the Empty Throne provides us a steady stream of 4/4 flying angels, which should bury our opponents quickly enough. Tale of Tenuvial is a saga with 3 incredibly powerful effects. We definitely want to be recycling the second and third effect more than the first, but all of them are pretty decent. The Cruelty of Gix acts as removal, a tutor, and a reanimation spell, which is all really great, particularly when we can reuse the abilities. The Eldest Reborn is purely removal and reanimation, and again, it's great when we can make this thing happen over and over and over. The First Iron Gains is fairly filler, but it does do a lot of things that we want, and since we have so many ways to manipulate our sagas, we can kind of choose which effect we want on each turn, which is great. The Horus Heresy is so much better when you can keep it in play indefinitely and keep triggering the same first and second abilities, because that's where most of the power lies in this card. It's kind of a must remove if you have any way to keep triggering the first ability. Otherwise, you're going to keep stealing all of your opponent's creatures until this gets removed. The Kami War does a lot of nice things. It's a very slow card, but it can definitely fit well in the value theme deck, and it can act as a finisher once you flip it. The Phasing of Zhalfir is a really interesting one again because we can keep it in play indefinitely, so we can just keep phasing out our opponent's stuff and never actually trigger the Destroy All Creatures ability, and eventually they're going to have to remove the Phasing of Zhalfir once they figure out what we're doing. The Restoration of Eiganjo works really nicely by being a good early game card that creates a decent creature on the flip side. The Trickster God's Heist is one I really like. You can give them one of your worst creature tokens and take the best thing. For the second chapter, you can give them one of your weaker things such as Long List of the Ents and take a really good enchantment of theirs or just mess with 2 separate opponents. And then the last one is going to give you a nice little life buff, but we can definitely re-trigger the first ability multiple times because it's really good. The War in Heaven gives us some pretty nice card advantage and reanimation. Since we won't necessarily always have enough targets for the reanimate pod, the card advantage is definitely the best one to have, and we have a lot of life gain in the deck to offset the life loss. The Weatherseed Treaty is just a good ramp saga. We do need some ramp in this deck, and we're not running much of the normal artifact ramp, so this is going to work pretty well. There and Back Again is aggressive in the first mode, so we definitely want to get the second and third mode as quickly as possible, particularly the third. If we can keep triggering the third mode, we're going to be pretty happy, particularly if we have a way to get our Smog to die. For sorceries, we have Farewell, which allows us to deal with most stuff while keeping our enchantments intact. Unnatural Restoration is a regrowth effect that also proliferates, and proliferate is something we're interested in. Power Conduit is great because we can remove counters from our sagas to stop them from sacrificing and put them onto our creatures. And Staff of Completion is fantastic in this deck because it's going to allow us to proliferate and draw cards whilst also being a mana rock. All things that we want to be doing. Finally, for lands, we've got Hall of Heliod's Generosity to recur any enchantments that get destroyed or sacrificed. Khan's Bastion is again another proliferate effect and one that doesn't cost us a non-land slot. And Nesting Grounds allows us to do some shenanigans with our sagas, although we do have to do it at sorcery speed. So there you have it. That has been my Tom Bombadil deck list. I hope you're as excited as I am to play this deck. I think it's really sweet that we finally have a really strong dedicated saga commander, and he's just so hard to remove that I think he's going to be quite tough to play against, to be honest. Think I missed anything? Let me know in the comments section below how you would build this deck. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care. Woo!